Within the Prussian military aristocracy of Berlin in the German Empire, a boy was born carrying the bloodline of generations of officers. His biological father was Eduard von Lewinsky, an outstanding artillery general. His mother was Helene von Sperling from a long-established officer family. He was the 10th child in the family. Shortly after his first cry, the boy was adopted by his aunt Hedwig and her husband, General Georg von Manstein, a noble couple without heirs. Following family tradition, his biological father sent a symbolic telegram: "Today you have given birth to a healthy son. Congratulations, Erich is yours." There were no tears, no hesitation, only sacred duty and the inheritance of honor. From that moment, Fritz Erich Georg Eduard von Lewinsky officially carried the Manstein surname. It was not only a new name, but an eternal commitment to serve the nation. He bore the expectations of an entire Prussian military class, where personal honor was inseparable from national destiny. His childhood offered few choices. From an early age, he was sent to harsh cadet schools, where iron discipline shaped the spirit. Absolute obedience became instinct, and unwavering faith in Germany's strength was instilled each day. In that environment, the qualities that would later define a great strategist quietly took root. He was not the flamboyant officer on the front line, but a deep thinker, a careful planner, always viewing war through the lens of organization and strategy. This was the beginning of a destiny belonging not only to one individual, but to an entire turbulent era. Erich von Manstein, the name history would remember, was forged from the core values of the Prussian aristocracy: duty, honor, and an unceasing will to serve. If you find this military history story profound and thought-provoking, please like the video and subscribe to the Silent Frontlines channel to explore more detailed analyses of legendary figures and campaigns of the 20th century. From the harsh years of cadet training, Erich von Manstein entered the military path almost inevitably. At 21, he officially joined the German Imperial Army as a second lieutenant. 8 years later, when Europe was engulfed in the flames of Great War, he was deployed to the front. Initially, Manstein fought on the Western Front, where he experienced fierce battles in Belgium and France. Soon afterward, he was transferred to the Eastern Front, a vast theatre where the war moved with a different rhythm, more fluid and brutal. There, at the end of 1914, he was seriously wounded. After 6 months of treatment, he returned to service in May 1915. That wound, viewed later, became a profound turning point in his destiny. Without it, he might have remained in the trenches like thousands of other young officers, becoming an anonymous casualty of a war of attrition. Instead of continuing to face direct gunfire, Manstein was transferred to staff duty. There he began to see war from a completely different perspective. It was no longer about bayonets and rifles, but about organization, logistics, operational tempo, and the structure of the entire front. This transition shaped his distinctive strategic thinking. He became more a cold-minded thinker than a fiery warrior. In 1916, he served in staff operations during the Battle of Verdun, one of the bloodiest and most stalemated battles in modern warfare. Hundreds of thousands of lives were sacrificed for only a few kilometers of ground. Although France ultimately held its position, Verdun for Manstein was not a story of victory or defeat. He did not see it as a French failure, but as a painful warning to Germany itself. Modern war could not be won by willpower alone or endless attrition. It was the symbol of deadly stagnation in trench warfare, where men were consumed by mud, barbed wire, and relentless fire. Service on both fronts gave him a rare and valuable perspective. On one side, the deadly stalemate of the Western trenches. On the other, the vast space and harsh mobility of the Eastern Front. This contrast nurtured Manstein's unique strategic thinking, the ability to combine firepower with rapid movement, cold calculation with battlefield flexibility. The lesson of Verdun, replacing attrition with maneuver and frontal assault with strikes at weak points, would later become the foundation for his bold plans, especially the sickle cut through the Ardennes forest in 1940. However, in 1918, everything collapsed. The German Empire surrendered. Emperor Wilhelm abdicated. The Treaty of Versailles was signed with harsh terms limiting the German army to 100,000 men. For many young officers, this defeat was not only a political event but a deep wound to honor and belief. During the severe selection process to form the new Reichswehr army, only the most capable officers were retained. Erich von Manstein was among them. This not only confirmed his ability, but also opened a long career path ahead in a wounded, restricted, and resentful Germany. From the trial by fire of the First World War, Manstein learned that war was not only courage and bloodshed, it was mathematics, organization, willpower, and lessons drawn from bloody mistakes. The empire collapsed, but the young officer remained standing, and from the ashes of 1918, his real journey had only just begun. Erich von Manstein entered a period of challenge and quiet preparation. Germany at that time sank into chaos, left-wing uprisings, right-wing coups, and persistent economic crises. In that environment, Manstein chose his own path. He did not enter the turbulent political arena. Instead, he focused entirely on his military profession, with the persistence and discipline characteristic of the Prussian aristocracy. In 1921, he was assigned command of a company. Afterward, he began teaching military history and tactics, where he passed on lessons drawn from the recent Great War to a new generation of young officers. By 1927, he was promoted to major and transferred to the staff. Although under the Treaty of Versailles, the German General Staff had officially been dissolved, in reality, the strategic brain of the army continued to exist discreetly and effectively. Manstein became an important part of that system. During these same years, he built his own family. In 1920, he married Jutta Sibylle von Loesch, the daughter of a noble family. For Manstein, the marriage did not arise from pure romance, but from a rational decision consistent with the status and future of a senior officer, family honor, and the army. These three pillars always went hand in hand in his worldview. Within the Reichswehr, a force of only 1,000,000 men, a quiet but profound process was taking place. This was not an ordinary army, but an army of junior generals. Every officer was trained to be versatile, capable of replacing a superior at any time. Manstein was a refined product of that harsh training system. He spent much time studying the deeper causes of the defeat of 1918. He concluded that Germany had not lost because of a lack of courage or patriotism, but because of insufficient preparation and an operational structure unsuited to modern warfare. That defeat became an obsession of honor for an entire generation of officers. They nurtured a quiet but powerful belief the defeat was only temporary. Germany, though bound by harsh restrictions, could prepare for a stronger return. Manstein worked under General Ludwig Beck, who represented a cautious school of thought, always fearing that another war would lead Germany to disaster. In contrast, Manstein belonged to a school of calculated risk. He believed that war could be won if prepared carefully with clear strategy and scientifically organized forces. The difference between the two men reflected the parallel currents of thought within the German army at the time. In a wounded, restricted, and resentful Germany, officers like Manstein quietly forged a new spirit. The belief that the defeat of 1918 was not the end, but only a pause before a new chapter. That psychological foundation would later become the driving force behind legendary lightning campaigns. Amid the instability and resentment of Germany in the late 1920s, a new figure gradually emerged on the political stage and quickly changed the nation's destiny. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor. For him, the army was not only a defensive force, but also a key instrument to remove the constraints of the Treaty of Versailles and restore Germany's strength. For many officers in the Reichswehr, including Erich von Manstein, this event opened a historic opportunity. Hitler quickly pushed forward rearmament. The army expanded rapidly, the Luftwaffe Air Force was established, and the Reichswehr was officially renamed the Wehrmacht. Manstein, whose abilities had been proven over many years, was quickly placed in important positions. On 1 July 1935, he was appointed Chief of Operations of the Army General Staff, a key position in Berlin. Shortly afterward, he was promoted to Major General. In this role, Manstein made significant contributions to reorganizing an army, growing at tremendous speed. He was especially involved in developing the Sturmgeschütz self-propelled gun, an idea that clearly reflected his deep understanding of mobile firepower in support of infantry. For Manstein, war was not only the art of arranging arrows on a map, but the precise combination of speed, firepower, and practical mobility on the battlefield. However, his career path was not always smooth. In 1938, after the internal army crisis involving Blomberg and Fritsch, Manstein was removed from Berlin and assigned to command an infantry division. On the surface, this appeared to be a setback, but in reality it became a valuable opportunity. Leaving the staff desk, he gained direct command of troops and assessed the real combat capability of units, expanding rapidly. He understood more clearly than ever both the strengths and the hidden limitations of the army Hitler was preparing for a major war. During the same period, Manstein participated in drafting the plan for the invasion of Poland. He contributed to building the pincer strategy from the north and the south, aiming to encircle and destroy Polish forces quickly near the border, rather than allowing them to withdraw deep into the interior. He viewed war as an architect views a blueprint, cold, logical, and focused on operational advantage. Politically, Manstein was not neutral. He shared opposition to Bolshevism and supported the idea of expanding living space to the east, a concept aligned with Hitler's strategic ambitions. In 1934, he had opposed the application of the Aryan clause in the army, not necessarily out of compassion, but from Prussian aristocratic pride. He did not want politics interfering in the officer corps, yet in April 1939 inches, a speech congratulating Hitler on his 50th birthday. He publicly expressed support for the political and racial policies of the National Socialist Party and declared readiness for a major war if necessary. This revealed a deep and interesting paradox in Manstein's character. He could disagree on organizational details and military tradition, yet he did not stand outside the regime's larger strategic goals. He saw himself as a professional soldier, but deep within he believed in Germany's mission in Eastern Europe, a struggle not only for territory but also for ideology. By 1939, at age 51, Erich von Manstein had travelled far from a cadet boy in Berlin to become one of the sharpest staff minds of the Wehrmacht. He had witnessed the collapse of an empire, absorbed the value of total strategy, and now believed that this time war could be calculated differently. War was no longer an unexpected tragedy, but a vast problem waiting for a solution, and Manstein was ready to draw the first arrows on the map of Europe. By the autumn of 1939, as arrows began to appear on maps of Europe, Erich von Manstein was no longer only a talented staff officer. He was ready to step into the role of architect of legendary lightning victories. At dawn on 1 September 1939, German artillery opened fire on Poland, marking the beginning of the Second World War. In a staff room filled with maps and telegrams, Manstein served as Chief of Staff of Army Group South under Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. He helped refine the pincer plan from the north and the south, designed to encircle and destroy Polish forces quickly near the border. The coordinated strike between armoured units, motorized infantry and air power proved highly effective. In less than 1 month, Poland collapsed. Militarily, it was a clean and rapid victory, clearly demonstrating Manstein's planning ability. But a greater challenge awaited in the West. Late in 1939, as Germany prepared to attack France, the initial Fall-Gelb plan was proposed. It largely repeated the scenario of 1914, advanced through Belgium and the Netherlands, avoiding the fortified Maginot Line. Manstein, now Chief of Staff of Army Group A, saw the danger clearly. He believed the Allies would easily anticipate this direction and concentrate their forces, leading to a war of attrition that Germany lacked the resources to sustain. With sharp and bold thinking, Manstein proposed a completely different approach. The main armoured forces would pass through the Ardennes forest terrain that most German and French generals believed impossible for a large tank army. Afterward, they would break through at Sedan, then drive straight to the English Channel, cutting off communication between British and French forces in the north. This plan later became known as the sickle cut, Sickelschnitt, a curved blade striking the enemy's vital weakness. The idea was further developed with informal cooperation from Heinz Guderian, the father of German armoured warfare. This represented the peak of what Manstein called mathematical warfare speed plus firepower, divided by the enemy's defensive depth. He was not only a staff officer behind a desk, but also a calculated risk-taker, willing to stake everything on precise calculations measured in kilometers. At first, many senior generals rejected the plan as too dangerous. Eventually, after repeated obstacles, the proposal reached Adolf Hitler. Hitler, who favored bold and surprising ideas, was convinced and ordered Manstein's concept integrated into the overall plan. On 10 May 1940, the operation began. While the northern thrust drew Allied attention in Belgium, Germany's main armoured forces moved quietly through the Ardennes. At Sedan, the French defensive line collapsed. Tank divisions raced westward at a speed that surprised both Berlin and London. Hundreds of thousands of British and French soldiers were trapped between two pincers. Dunkirk became the symbol of an urgent evacuation. France could not hold. In June 1940, Paris fell. France signed an armistice. Continental Europe was almost entirely under German control. This lightning victory raised Erich von Manstein to a new level of prominence. He received the Knight's Cross, was promoted to general, and given command of the 56th Panzer Corps, a significant transition from planner to field commander, directing breakthroughs. After the victory, Manstein supported a rapid landing in Britain to end the war in Western Europe before turning east. However, Hitler decided to postpone the invasion of Britain and prepare for a larger war in the east. The victory of 1940 was so perfect that it created a dangerous illusion. Speed and willpower seemed able to replace logistical depth and long-term resources. France collapsed in only 6 weeks. But the Soviet Union would not be another France, and Manstein, though a brilliant architect of lightning victory, would soon face the harsh limits of real war. After the lightning victory in France, the aura of blitzkrieg seemed unstoppable. Yet when Adolf Hitler shifted focus to the east, Erich von Manstein again found himself in a key position in a war of entirely different scale and nature. At dawn on 22 June 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. More than 3 million German and Axis soldiers crossed the Soviet border along a front stretching thousands of kilometers. Within Army Group North, Manstein commanded the 56th Panzer Corps, advancing toward Leningrad. In the first weeks, the Wehrmacht seemed unstoppable. Massive encirclements closed repeatedly, capturing hundreds of thousands of Red Army prisoners. However, vast distances stretched supply lines, and growing resistance gradually slowed the pace. By September 1941, Manstein was urgently transferred south. He was appointed commander of the 11th Army in Ukraine, replacing General Eugen Ritter von Schobert, who had died in an aircraft accident. His mission was to capture the entire Crimean Peninsula, especially the fortress of Sevastopol, a key Soviet naval base on the Black Sea. For Hitler, Crimea held strategic importance for protecting Romanian oil. For Manstein, it was an unsinkable aircraft carrier. If not neutralized, the southern flank of Barbarossa would remain threatened. The 11th Army operated almost in isolation, far from the main army groups with limited supplies and few reserves. Manstein commanded about 2,000 German and Romanian troops with initially limited air support. Nevertheless, by early winter 1941, most of Crimea fell to German control. Only Sevastopol remained one of the most fortified positions in Europe, with reinforced concrete defences meters thick and armoured turrets such as Maxim Gorky I and II embedded deep underground. The siege of Sevastopol took place in harsh weather. But the greatest crisis came from the east. In late December 1941, the Red Army landed on the Kerch Peninsula, threatening to split German forces. Under pressure, Manstein made a bold decision. He withdrew forces from the siege of Sevastopol, risking a counterattack, and concentrated on destroying the Kerch threat. It was a dangerous gamble, but precisely calculated. In spring 1942, during Operation Trappenjagd, Manstein launched a rapid counterattack. Reinforced by the 8th Air Corps under Wolfram von Richthofen, he coordinated infantry, artillery, and air power as a unified force. Concentrated firepower crushed the Kerch defences. The threat behind his lines was eliminated. Only then did Manstein return to Sevastopol with full strength. During Operation Sturfang, he deployed the largest weapons of the Third Reich, the 800mm Dora Super Heavy gun and 600mm Karl Gerät mortars. He personally supervised ballistic calculations to penetrate reinforced concrete defences. Richthofen's air force bombed continuously, while heavy artillery fired thousands of tons of shells into the city. Firepower intensity reached unprecedented levels on the Eastern Front. In July 1942, Sevastopol finally fell. The victory in Crimea marked the military peak of Erich von Manstein's career. Despite commanding isolated forces against larger opponents in harsh conditions, the 11th Army achieved success with significantly lower casualties. At age 54, he was promoted to Field Marshal. His reputation reached its height. Many considered him a master strategist, capable of solving the most difficult problems with flexibility and cold calculation. However, beneath the glow of victory lay a darker reality. In areas controlled by the 11th, Army special units carried out ethnic and political purges. The Commissar order and ideological directives blurred the line between military victory and a war of destruction. Manstein later claimed he only fulfilled military duty, but allowing such actions within his zone raised deep questions about command responsibility. The Crimea victory confirmed Manstein's extraordinary military talent while revealing the limits and paradoxes of a brilliant general serving in an ideological war. From this point, he would receive increasingly difficult missions, where strategic brilliance would face vast distances, harsh weather, and a more resilient opponent than ever before. Just as the brilliant victory in Crimea brought Erich von Manstein to the height of fame, the Eastern Front entered one of its darkest phases. The course of the war began to shift, and Stalingrad became the symbol of an unavoidable tragedy. At the end of 1942, when the Sixth Army under Friedrich Paulus was completely encircled in the city on the Volga River, Adolf Hitler created Army Group Don and assigned Manstein the task of rescue. On 21 November 1942 Manstein took command. At headquarters in Novocherkassk, he spent sleepless nights over maps, calculating every kilometre for the armoured relief thrusts. He built a clear two-step plan. First, Operation Winter Storm, an attack from the south to approach the encirclement. Second, the thunderclap option, in which the Sixth Army under Paulus would break out from inside to link with the relief force. This was the only feasible military solution, because air supply was an illusion. Manstein clearly understood that Göring's air force could not deliver enough food and ammunition for more than 2,000,000 trapped soldiers. On 12 December 1942, Operation Winter Storm began. German armoured divisions advanced from Kotelnikovo, broke Soviet defensive lines and pushed deep toward the pocket. At times, the relief force came within about 50 kilometres of Paulus. It was the closest distance hope could reach. However, the Red Army reacted quickly and deployed reserves. Defensive lines thickened. Manstein's forces lacked the strength for a decisive breakthrough. Inside Stalingrad, Paulus hesitated and did not act. An excellent staff officer, he lacked decisiveness in field command. Without direct orders from Hitler, he did not attempt a breakout. Even if he had tried, his tanks had fuel for only a short distance. Logistical failures and blind faith in air supply drove the situation into a dead end. On 18 December, Manstein formally requested permission for Paulus to withdraw from Stalingrad and link with the relief force. Hitler firmly refused. Stalingrad had to be held at all costs for honor and political meaning. A city bearing Stalin's name could not fall. The chance of survival appeared clearly, yet it was locked by orders from the highest level. The harsh winter tightened the encirclement. Temperatures dropped far below zero. Food and ammunition ran out. Soldiers died from hunger, cold and disease. By late January 1943, the remaining forces were split into isolated pockets. On 2 February 1943, the last units of the Sixth Army surrendered. Out of more than 250,000 encircled troops, only about 91,000 survived to enter captivity. Stalingrad was not just a military defeat, it was the greatest psychological shock the Wehrmacht had ever suffered. For the first time in the war, an entire German army was destroyed. Manstein demonstrated exceptional rescue ability, but he was bound by politics and decisions from above. His plan had brought the relief force as close as possible, yet the will of one man and rigid orders destroyed everything. After Stalingrad, Manstein's role shifted from expanding victory to preventing collapse. He retained his reputation as one of the most talented commanders, but from this point the Wehrmacht entered a difficult defensive phase, where military skill faced increasingly clear limits of both strategy and politics. After the disaster of Stalingrad, the Eastern Front shook violently. The Red Army launched successive offensives, pushing German forces westward. Amid the spreading danger of collapse, Erich von Manstein was assigned command of Army Group South, the most critical defensive sector. Early in 1943, he launched a bold counterattack to retake Kharkov. Instead of direct confrontation, Manstein used a lure tactic. He allowed the enemy to advance, deep-stretch their formation, then launched armoured strikes against the flank. This method was later called the backhand blow. The result was the recapture of Kharkov in March, with Soviet casualties about 8 times higher than German losses. It was one of the last major counter-offensive victories of the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front, proving that Manstein's command skill and tactical flexibility remained intact. However, north of Kharkov, a large salient formed around Kursk, southwest of Moscow. German command saw this as the last opportunity to regain initiative. The plan was named Operation Citadel Attack from north and south, to encircle and destroy large Soviet forces. Manstein commanded the southern pincer, an extremely important role. He proposed launching the attack in May before Soviet defences were fully prepared. Manstein understood that time favoured the enemy, but Adolf Hitler postponed the operation until July to wait for new tanks such as Panther and Tiger. This delay proved a major strategic mistake. Germany gained only several hundred tanks, while the Soviet Union gained months to prepare. They built the deepest defensive system ever seen, millions of mines, dense trench networks, anti-tank guns in depth, and intelligence advantages from Allied sources. On 5 July 1943, Operation Citadel began. On the southern front under Manstein, German forces achieved initial progress. Tiger tanks pushed through endless minefields while artillery and air power supported heavily. At Prokhorovka, a small plain, one of the largest tank battles in history occurred. Both sides suffered heavy losses, but strategic advantage gradually shifted to the Soviet Union. When Allied forces landed in Sicily on 9 July, Hitler feared for the Italian front and ordered the operation halted. Kursk marked the end of Blitzkrieg. From then on, the Wehrmacht was almost constantly on the defensive. Manstein advocated elastic defense, concede territory, draw the enemy forward, then counterattack the flanks to preserve strength. In his view, this was the only way to maintain combat power with shrinking resources. However, Hitler saw withdrawal as weakness. He ordered every position held at all costs, forbidding retreats without direct permission. The gap between Manstein's flexible military thinking and Hitler's rigid political will became irreconcilable. In autumn 1943, German forces withdrew to the Dnieper Line. Early in 1944, the Red Army launched a large encirclement near Cherkasy. Facing destruction, Manstein allowed encircled units to break out, effectively contradicting Hitler's intent. Despite heavy losses, most troops escaped. This became the breaking point. When meeting Hitler at Berghof on 30 March 1944, Manstein openly requested greater tactical freedom for field commanders and changes in high command. Hitler responded by awarding him the Swords to the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, one of the highest decorations. Immediately afterward, he dismissed Manstein. Walter Model replaced him, known for rigid defensive methods, more aligned with Hitler's hold at all costs philosophy. From that moment, Erich von Manstein's direct battlefield command ended. He received no further field command for the rest of the war. He was the last to attempt restoring initiative through pure military skill, but political structure and Hitler's personal will lay beyond any strategist's control. Kursk was not only a failed operation, It marked the end of hopes to reverse the war with lightning strikes. When Erich von Manstein was dismissed in the spring of 1944, his journey of direct command on the battlefield came to an end. In the final years of the war, he lived in relative isolation. He even attempted to request a meeting with Adolf Hitler in Berlin, but it was not granted. As the Red Army pushed deep into German territory and Western Allied forces landed in France and advanced eastward, the defeat of the Third Reich became inevitable. In April 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. On 8 May of the same year, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Manstein was captured by British forces and held in a camp for senior officers. Unlike many other Nazi leaders, he was not immediately tried at the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, but appeared only as a witness. There, an argument gradually formed, and later became the foundation of a long-lasting myth. The Wehrmacht was merely a professional army, obeying orders and fighting according to traditional military rules. In this view, all major crimes belonged to the SS and the Nazi Party apparatus, while the general staff and commanders, such as Manstein, were placed in the position of men who either did not know or could not prevent what happened. Together with several other generals, Manstein participated in drafting lengthy memoranda aimed at defending the reputation of the general staff. He asserted that he had not carried out certain orders that violated the laws of war. However, reality was far more complex. Later documents showed that forward commands, including areas under Manstein's responsibility, had received reports about the activities of special units. Ideological directives were circulated within zones controlled by the Wehrmacht. The question was no longer whether he personally held a weapon, but what responsibility he bore as a supreme commander for what occurred. In 1948, under pressure from the Soviet Union, the British arrested Manstein and brought him to trial in Hamburg in 1949. He faced nearly 20 charges related to his conduct on the Eastern Front. The court found him guilty on 9 counts and sentenced him to 18 years in prison. The sentence was later reduced to 12 years. However, he served only 4 years. Several factors contributed to this outcome. Strong advocacy from his defense lawyer Reginald Paget, a book defending him, and the rapidly changing international context. The Cold War intensified. West Germany became an important front line for the West against the Soviet Union. Manstein skillfully presented himself as an expert who understood how to confront the Red Army, and this argument gained support from some British politicians. In May 1953, he was released for health reasons. From this point, a historical paradox began. The former field marshal who had served Hitler became an unofficial advisor to the government of the Federal Republic of Germany during the creation of the Bundeswehr, the new West German army. He helped shape a doctrine of mobile defense within the NATO framework. The myth of a clean Wehrmacht was not only a product of self-justification but also an implicit agreement of the era. The West needed a strong West Germany to counter the Soviet Union. In return, they accepted the interpretation that the German army was separate from the crimes of the SS. In 1955, Manstein published his memoir titled Verlorene Siege, Lost Victories. The book reinforced his image as a military genius obstructed by Hitler and continued to separate the Wehrmacht from responsibility for the regime. This work strongly influenced perceptions of the German army for many decades afterward. Erich von Manstein died in 1973 and was buried with full military honors. A former convicted war criminal was honored by the army of a democratic Germany. His legacy remains divisive among historians and the public to this day. On one hand, he is praised as one of the most brilliant strategic minds of World War II, the man who designed the Ardennes Plan and commanded sophisticated counteroffensives in the East. On the other hand, he was an inseparable part of the war of invasion and destruction in the Soviet Union, where millions of civilians and prisoners of war died. Manstein was not an architect of the Holocaust, but he served the war machine that allowed it to function. He knew about plots to assassinate Hitler, yet he neither participated nor reported them. That neutrality reflected a choice to prioritize the survival of the army and his personal position over direct confrontation with tyranny. The story of Erich von Manstein is not only a story of military talent, but also one of the most difficult moral dilemmas of modern history. Can an outstanding commander truly separate himself from the criminal system he serves? Can brilliant strategy stand apart from basic moral values? Manstein stands as a vivid and paradoxical example of the limits of the professional soldier. In an extreme era, history does not provide simple answers, but it forces us to keep asking questions. Only by facing those questions can we truly understand the nature of war and the responsibility of human beings. If you are exploring historical figures and lessons from military conflicts of the previous century, please like this video and subscribe to the Silent Frontlines channel so you do not miss upcoming detailed analyses.